get ready because I have not 3, not 5, but 10 of my favorite photo manipulation tips and tricks for Photoshop. From getting the absolute most out of the new generative fill tool, to seamlessly blending landscapes together, and creating disgustingly awesome veins, along with my absolute favorite way to make rain, and more. About 6 more things, specifically. I'm Abby Esparza with Envato Tuts Plus, and I have 10 years of creative compositing experience. Hey, a tip for each year. But we have tons to cover, and I'm going to try and be real quick with it. Let's jump right into it, starting with generative fill. Generative fill has tons of uses. My favorite is expanding images and generating new elements. So first, let's use generative fill to expand our image past its original bounds. Select the crop tool and set the fill to generative expand in the options bar. You can alternatively use the floating context bar. All the images used today are found on Envato Elements, by the way. You can find all the links below, but more on Elements a little later. Next, you'll want to use the crop tool to expand the canvas to your preferred dimensions. And Photoshop will automatically generate and fill in any and all of that empty space. In the Properties panel, you'll find 3 variations of that generative fill. Click through to pick your favorite, or you can hit generate to get 3 fresh variations, and this is my primary use for generative fill. I really love expanding images. But next, I want to look at jazzing up this image with some generative fill magic. So in our wedding photo, I've got this idea to extend the train of the dress towards the front of the camera here. So let's start by selecting that area where we want to add the detail using the lasso tool, and it will keep the shape of the selection in mind. Then we're going to click on generative fill in the floating context bar. Type in a description of the detail you want, like white cloth or even dress train possibly, and hit generate. Again, we'll be given 3 variations, or we can make a few more if we need to. And we can repeat that step as much as we want. You know, add some flowers, some whimsical tree branches, maybe a forest background. We can also remove details, add some lights. A slight warning though, generative fill layers can increase the size of a Photoshop file by a lot. Once you're happy with the results, it's always best to really right-click rasterize all of those generative fill layers, unless you have a whole lot of storage and memory, but it puts my 64 gigs of RAM to the test. Second up, we have a blend if. A blend if is one of my favorite, most underrated settings in my opinion. Think of it as an advanced control for layer opacity. So we have our base sky and then a landscape image right on top. Let's double click the landscape image to open the layer style panel. And towards the bottom here, we'll see the blend if settings. This first time we're going to focus on the current layer settings. So first we want to split the toggles into 2 halves by clicking a toggle half, holding Alt Control, and then pulling the toggles apart. A blend if works by blending away an image based on luminosity or levels, how bright or dark an image is. So these toggles say, for this layer, only show the parts where the brightness falls within this specific range. We want to place the toggle so that the landscape blends seamlessly with the base image here, but still keeps all the important details. Do not focus on these exact settings. Blend if does not have exact settings. Move around the toggles and watch the image. We're ending up with an almost reflection effect in the water, which I really like. However, some of the image was definitely overly blended, but there is a super easy fix for that. Let's create a new layer below our landscape layer and name it Solid. Because now we're going to use a semi-hard dark colored brush to paint color behind any areas you want to appear more solid. We're bringing back those dark spots, basically. Like here, I definitely want to paint behind a lot of the mountains and land, so they don't look transparent. I also wouldn't use black for this. Try to use a really dark color of an already existing color in your image. Like here, I chose a darker blue. And we can do this to blend other details into our landscape as well. I particularly love to do this with clouds. We can then set the clouds to screen and do some quick masking and an instant cloud effect. Fire, feathers, and smoke are also great things to extract using this method. A third up, extracting hair. And this is just my absolute go-to for extracting hair, because it works on different hair types and colors and uses select mask to do most, if not all, of the heavy lifting. Let's start by creating a rough selection of the hair. There are a few options to do this, but the quickest way is to just hit select subject in the new context bar. Now add a layer mask to get your rough mask. Let's go to select a mask in the properties panel. Click on refine hair, And there are settings to play with, but that refine hair button really does the trick 90% of the time. We can finish things off though by choosing decontaminate color, setting it to 75 to 100%, but that's it. A perfectly extracted hair in less than, 2 minutes? On to number 4, let's look at how to create face and body paint. This is one of my favorite techniques that I've been using for years. And while it's super versatile, warrior paint is always a classic go-to. We just need 2 adjustment layers. First, a black and white layer. And right above that, a brightness contrast layer set to a brightness of 57 and a contrast of -37 in this case. But those settings will change image to image. Because what we're going to do is group them together, add a layer mask, and then invert that mask using Control/Command-I. So everything should be now hidden. And then we want to grab a paint textured brush, like this or that, to mask where we want our warrior's body paint to be. Those adjustments are our paint. And how you paint this is completely up to you. There are tons of options here. You can also duplicate this group for an even stronger effect if the paint feels a little too transparent or light. And even cooler, you can always throw a gradient map set to multiply in this group to change the paint's color. And remember BlendIf, the one thing we just got done talking about? Well, you can play with the gradient's BlendIf settings to remove the gradient from those highlights to bring in almost a shine effect, leaving you with a really lovely blood effect in this case. Though there is more blood coming up later on. Number 5, creating quick planets. Specifically a quick base for planets or other textured spheres. Great for posters, other graphics, and just any sci-fi or surreal work. First, grab a terrain-like texture, like this free-to-use texture by NASA, and let's use the elliptical marquee tool to create a circle selection. Now we're going to go to Filter, Distort, Spherize, and set the amount to 100%. You can repeat this step a few times if the planet just doesn't look quite round enough. Add a layer mask to the sphere, and this is our planet base. Now what you do next is completely up to you and how you want your planet or moon or rock to look. I used a combination of hue, saturation, and color balance to add a nice pink hue to my planet, just to match their surroundings. I also used a clipped curve adjustment layer to darken the planet's middle, masking the edges, and that creates that nice rim light effect. Then I continued to beef up that rim light and bounce light using a clip layer set to screen. And a soft round brush to just lightly paint some of the environment's color onto my planetary sphere here. And this is just a great starting point. You can push it as far as you want. You can also just try it out on different textures, not just land terrain. In fact, I love just browsing Envato Elements looking for different interesting textures I can combine with this or any of the other techniques we'll be covering today. Variety and versatility are essential to me in both my methods and my resources. I get very bored very easily. So Envato Elements' almost endless sea of resources and assets provide me with an equally infinite sea of inspiration. I love to grab anything that catches my eye and just freely experiment. I also create collections based on specific aesthetics that I can then tap into when I need an extra little concentrated dose of inspiration, which has even helped me with client work. If I know the vibe they're going for, I already end up having a nice place to start. As always, you can grab the assets I've used here today, or completely new ones, from Envato Elements using the link down below. Number 6, creating instant backlit hair. This is an easy technique to use whenever you want a nice stylistic backlit hair effect, great for portraits and character designs. I already have my subject nice and extracted and her background laid down, but I'd like her hair to catch some of that nice vivid red light there. So let's duplicate the extracted subject, bringing it below the original. Name this layer Fill, like F-I-L-L, not with a PH. Next we want to fill the fill layer with whatever color we want our backlit hair, so a vivid red here. Now let's select the Move tool, click on one of the anchors to enter Free Transform, and then enter the Warp Transform mode. And we're going to warp the fill layer so that the red silhouette's hair kind of peeks from behind the subject's hair. Only focus on the hair here, don't worry about all that extra red. Because once we're happy with the hair, we're going to add a layer mask and then mask away all that extra color. Now, if the edges around the hair and the fill layer look a little too harsh like they do here, you can always clip a new layer right into the subject, And then paint nice little loose flyaway hair strands along with some soft colored light, just to soften and blend the edges into one another a bit. And while our hair here is very short, this also works a charm on long hair, I promise. I've been doing it for years. Number 7, my favorite rain technique. This rain technique is both quick and simple, and it can create any rain effect from a light drizzle to a straight up downpour. First, create a new layer and fill it with black using the paint bucket tool. Now let's go to Filter, Pixelate, Mezzotint, and set the type to Coarse Dots. Zoom in close to those white dots, and go to Select, Color Range. Click on a dot and adjust the fuzziness to 200, press OK, and this will select all of those little white dots. And we're going to add a layer mask, and enter Selected Mask. We want to look at the global refinements, setting the feather to around 2 pixels and the contrast to around 50%. You might need to play with that. This is just going to thin out the dots. The more dots, the heavier the rain will appear, so feel free to, again, play with these settings. It just depends what you want. But now we're going to duplicate this layer twice using Control/Command-J, leaving us with 3 layers. We're going to select all 3 layers, right-click, merge them, renaming this layer Rain, and this is our base rain. And again, let's duplicate the layer twice, but hide 2 of the layers as we're going to be editing each one individually. So for this first layer, let's go to Filter, Blur Gallery, Path Blur. And we're going to stretch out the rain using this path control. And this is going to give us that initial motion blur effect. But then why use path blur and not motion blur? So by placing points on the path, and then pulling in different directions, we can actually create movement in the rain. You always want your rain to be going in more than one direction. Just give it a slight more dynamic feel. You can also play with the movement speed, though the default 50 often works fine for me. And once this is looking good, we'll repeat the same steps on those other dot layers. We want to increase the size of each set of dots little by little, as well as flip them horizontally so there's no repeating patterns. And we also want to pull the path blurs in slightly different directions so the rain doesn't end up looking too flat or static. Rain has a lot of movement to it. And I'm going to merge these layers together once I'm happy. You can always duplicate the layer if your rain looks a little too light. But most importantly, I like to go to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation. We're going to check Colorize and add just a tint of color to the rain. Rain is transparent, so it's going to end up reflecting the light in its environment, in this case a nice vivid blue. But you can also add multiple colors to the rain using clipped layers, which ends up looking very nice. You can also make some of the areas of rain extra bright by duplicating it, setting it to overlay, and then masking it out over areas of, in this case, really bright light. Again, this is just one of those excellent go-to base techniques that can be endlessly customized to fit a particular scene. Big fan. Number 8, veins. It's another classic go-to technique for a perfectly realistic set of veins. We'll start by creating our actual vein texture. Go ahead and create a new canvas that is at least 3000 by 3000 pixels in size. We want it nice and big. Go to Filter, Render, Clouds. And then Filter, Render, Difference Clouds. And here we can already start to see how this is very vein-like, but we do have to do some color adjusting. So let's create a new layer filled with solid white, right below our clouds here. Bring the cloud layer down to 50% opacity, and then we're going to merge those. Next, go to Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast. And we're going to bring the brightness to 50 and the contrast all the way to 100. Finally, let's go to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation, and check Colorize. And this is just going to automatically change the veins to red, but you can do a nice blue or purple, maybe even a green, whatever floats your boat. And now we just have to slap this texture on a subject, set it to color burn, maybe adjust the opacity a bit, and of course do some masking, and that's it. That being said, the layer mode and opacity will change not only from subject to subject, but body part to body part. For example, you can use this texture to create a really nice bloodshot eye effect when set to overlay. You can also use hue saturation to change the color of the veins. I went with a nice purple in the end. Or adjust their hardness using Gaussian blur, which will really help them look more underneath the skin. You don't want them to look too sharp. This is a texture you'll want to really layer and build up to get the grossest, creepiest effect that you can get. Also make sure you export that vein texture, maybe make a couple so you can reach for them super easily, and not have to remake them over and over again. Number 9, a better way to oil paint. Or more specifically, a better oil paint effect than the, not great built-in filter. First, we gotta set up the mixer brush found bundled here with the brush tool. Here are the settings. We're going to change that flow as we go. Now we want to make sure we have some kind of artistic brush active, something, oil paint-like. And all we have to do is use this brush on our subject. Brush anywhere you want to apply an oil or maybe digital paint-like effect. The brush will drag the colors and smooth out the texture while also leaving behind the texture of the brush itself. If you want the oil effect to appear really heavy or thick, increase the flow setting. But if the effect is too strong or the colors are mixing and looking a little too muddy, then you'll want to decrease that flow setting. Right now, I'm just focusing on smoothing the skin and adding a subtle amount of texture. You want to paint in one consistent direction, not back and forth. And also really try to follow the image's natural shapes, shading, and lighting, or else things again can start to look really muddy and just blurry. Now, if we want a really intense looking brush stroke, which I do, we can bring the flow up to 100% and drag in one direction really hard. You can go in any direction, but you want to be consistent with the movement. Don't drag back and forth. You don't want to mix the colors. You want to drag the colors, or things will start to look muddier and blurry, as opposed to nice crisp lines. And that'll give you a lovely textured smear oil paint effect that I'm a big fan of. And we're finishing things up with a wickedly easy blood effect. Another staple in my horror tool belt. Let's create a new layer and set it to multiply. And we're going to paint the base or the shape of our blood with a nice dark red or medium red colors. This will be the general shape you want your blood to be. Don't be afraid of simple shapes. I love a simple drop effect. And looking at references is always a great idea if you don't mind the sight of blood. A quick tip, the darker the blood, the thicker it's going to look. I personally like a really dark, thick looking blood. Next, create a new layer below the blood base and set it to overlay. Let's grab a default hard round brush, and we're going to open the window brush settings panel and check wet edges. We're going to paint thinner or more transparent pools of blood around our thicker blood base here. I like to paint pools of blood with a nice, thick, darker color around the edges and a thinner area of color in the middle. Give it a lot of variation. You can also build the blood up using multiple layers set to overlay and multiply, making it appear darker and darker and thicker. You can even add some shadows to the particularly thicker areas of blood. But don't overthink it, it's going to look messy, don't worry. In fact, this is looking more than good enough. Let's create a new layer and use a very light pale red to paint small little highlights on the blood. We're using that same hard brush set to wet from earlier. I like to set the brush size to between 3 and 6 pixels, but that's just going to depend on the size of your image and your highlight size. You're going to want to make some highlights bigger and others smaller, some long and some short. Just try and follow the shapes that you painted. You can also use a soft eraser brush to taper and fade the highlights. We don't want them to appear overly solid. Again, references are great here. And we can finish up by adding some ruby red light on a new layer set to screen, just to bring a little light and dimension to the really dark areas. Also, if you change up the colors, you can easily get different, slime and goop effects using this. And that wraps up what ended up being a pretty comprehensive list of some of my tried and true techniques. Things I've been doing for years now, which is fun to think about. Or scary, I don't know yet. I'd love to know if you have a favorite, comment that down below. Mine is definitely either the blood or the body paint trick. If not just for how simple but versatile they are, also I've just been doing them for years now. You can also check out some of the other videos on Envato Tuts Plus. If you like this video, consider giving us a like and even subscribing if you still need to. And remember to click the little bell icon to be notified of all our new videos, including tips, tricks, and of course tutorials. Happy designing, see you next time.